Now man, having created all things, the grass, well, everything, isn't it? Grass, germs, waterfalls, water itself, land mass, rivers and streams and waterfalls, and all the globes in the heavens and the heavens themselves. All right, everything. He upholds, therefore, everything that he has created by his rhetoric. And this is, again, well, we have movements to save the planet, to preserve the planet. And man can do this. And if man does this and man does that, then the planet shall continue on. You see, this is how man is with his rhetoric. He lives in a world of rhetoric. And so it is, having displaced and replaced God and denied God in his creation, man sees himself in the creation. Wicked, evil, self-opinionated, deceitful man. Right? And do you know what happens? As man goes down and down and down into the pit, he then brings all along with him, indeed out of the pit, draws out of the pit as he's going towards the pit of perdition, lies, deceit and falsehood. Now, I'd like to say this, okay? This will be as upsetting as we have said that Spurgeon was a hypocrite, an unbeliever, unless, of course, you're going to say that C.H. Spurgeon, when he made a pact with God, his own God, the God of his imagination, that if God would heal him, that God could use him for whatever purpose, to the good of his name. Of course, Spurgeon got healed. He then thanked this God and served this God and claimed that was his salvation. All you need to do is go into the hospitals and say to a person, right, make a pact with God, and then if you're healed, you're a Christian. Huh? No. Do you know, in this world there is deceit and deceit upon deceit, heaped one upon another. And the Spurgeons of this world have gotten away with creeping in unawares because of their rhetoric and how the world has praised and served them. And this is a very, very serious point. You see, the world has put these persons, the Charles Grandison Finneys, and Dwight Limas Moody's, the Martin Lloyd-Jones and the Ian Paisleys, and the William Bryan Tozers, Amy Semple McPherson's, etc., etc., on pedestals and is worshipped. And what has Christendom done? Christendom as the world, reflecting the world, has put them on pedestals. And what have we done, who are the true regenerates of God? We've done the same. And it's only when we stand back and we examine all things, contemplate all things, examine all things, that we see the truth out of the lie. Now, this is not only confined to the sacred sphere, all right? We must grow up, learn to grow up, to study all things, because, ladies and gentlemen, there are deceits that go unnoticed, such as the Spurgeons of this world. But deceits in everyday life, alright? Now, it is accepted that there are some true, born again, children of God, the elect, that sit in front of their televisions, being fed what the world would have them to believe. And they argue for the TV, for the government, for the news. But whilst they're there, they're being brainwashed. They are not being renewed in their understanding. They're not at all being renewed. Their mind is corrupt. The heart is corrupt above all things and desperately wicked. And if we're sitting in front of the TV, feeding off the TV, soaking in what the TV says, the news, the government, then how can we be renewed? Paul rightly says, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is good and acceptable and perfect will of God. You can't do that if you're sitting in front of a corrupt being. Not only that, newspapers are corrupt, radio's corrupt, the world is entirely corrupt because it comes from a corrupt creation of evolution. Man has created this world, and you know the judgment upon man, one of the many, many judgments upon man, is that God has given him over to believe a lie. So he not only believes the lie that he is created, but he actually deceives himself. You see, let's go down to the basics. Of recent times, right, we've had all these terrorist organisations in the world. And there are Christians that are going round and like the rest of the world, no different than the rest of the world, saying, oh, ISIS this and ISIS that. Well, ISIS doesn't exist. But the media says so. Well, the media lies and is deception and is given over to this by God. It's the judgment of God upon it. And persons that are sitting there believing all this nonsense, that an Egyptian mythological goddess is going round with a group of people shooting everybody, it's a total pack of lies. It cannot be proven. We can prove it's a lie. We can totally prove it's a lie. Alright? You look at Bataclan, or, well, you know, the Paris shooting in the Bataclan and also in restaurants, alright? Done by ISIS, says the government. Government says ISIS claims responsibility for this. Oh yes, fine, okay, yeah, great. And people sit back and go, oh, we must do something about ISIS. You know. But what they don't do is watch the film footage, alright, which we found over the internet, alright, to watch the film footage. In a restaurant, for instance, two men sitting down at a table, clear as day, sitting down, having a meal. Woman comes up outside to a door which the pane of glass has been removed. She throws a device in and then runs in after it. Goes past the device. Now she's doing so. These two fellas, having their meal, go underneath the table. About 3 minutes later, this CCTV footage shows us the two fellas that went under the table coming back up. One of them has turned into a full-fledged woman with a handbag. If that is not trickery, what is? How would you get a man going down, two men going down underneath a table, and one of them comes up 2 or 3 minutes later as a fully fledged woman with a handbag and walks off? How did the pane of glass come to be missing in the door? How is it that outside that supermarket the police blow themselves up and yet not one of them died? The explosion went off in their hands. The flash in their hands. None of them died. Then, all of a sudden, as that went off, the officers just up above them opened fire on them. Plain as day, you can see it going off. And yet the officers are never killed. You see, it was all a false event in order to give body, bones, flesh to this group called ISIS. Now, if ISIS existed, it couldn't claim a false event to be it. Because at the end of the day, it may be proven to be a false event, and it was proven to be a false event, and then they get laughed at and called a bunch of liars. So it didn't exist. Brussels. How many bombs went off in Brussels? 2 bombs. Well, according to the eyewitnesses, 2 bombs behind the counter. Right, the departures at 7 o'clock went off, and then gunfire began at 7 o'clock between them and the security forces. Then you get other witnesses that were there, claim they were there at the check-in, who say 2 bombs only went off at 8 o'clock. And they wondered where the security forces were. And all the smoke in the terminal. Nobody's choking. It gives it away. It gives it away. And the fella picking up the plastic dolly. Anybody notice that? No, we should examine all things. He picked up this plastic dolly. Where did he run? Did he run with his wife to the exit that was a few feet away from him? No, he didn't. What did he do? Well, the bombs had gone off in the departures, so he ran to the departures, giving the game away again. And then, of course, one of the bombers, so-called, a young fella, it began with in the airport terminal, a young fella, is then seen on the street by CCTV as an old fella. Yeah, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? Utterly, utterly ridiculous. Boston bombing. Marathon bombing. The 2 pressure cookers that went off. Alright? With the bolts in them, and took off the lower limbs. Notice the lower limbs of the spectators. Alright? Now, for one, are we that dull that it's a marathon? People are running, legs are going, all right? And then what follows is 2 containers, pressure cookers, go off, bolts flying, rips off the legs of the spectators, not the arms, doesn't do any damage to the arms or the heads or anything like that, rips off the bodies, all right? And people swallow this. Okay? That's true, because the media said it's true. And this is the judgment of God upon man. That God has given man over to a strong delusion that he should believe a lie. When we look at it, we actually find footage of people that are there one moment, a group of people, and gone the next. So it's been altered. We've got the monitors on the route. One moment they're there, next minute they've gone. So they've film footaged in an editing suite. And what really truly gives the game away is the fact that there is footage there taken. The chap, for instance, Bowman, all right, who's had his leg blown off and he's sitting in a wheelchair, and there are 3 other people around him posing with this chap in a wheelchair, and yet to the side of him, to the left hand side, the spectator sitting hasn't been put in place. So the photograph was taken days before the event took place, because the seating hadn't been put in place. And there are other footage where the seating hasn't been put in place, but there are photographs of people having had their limbs ripped off. How can that be? How can they have the limbs ripped off if the event hasn't even begun? There is a school that trains the armed forces, okay? Crisis school, where persons have lost their limbs. And it's all to do with training in the battlefield. We'll be back in a second with a short ending.